to share?
I thought it was very interesting. Well, first off, like him describing the sheer number of snails that they have to go through. He said they get 1 million snails a year from Croatia.
No, I don't think he said that.
Yeah, he
said
did.
that.
A million?
A year.
Yeah.
Wow.
But
That's
I
a lot.
asked him afterwards. He says, I asked how sustainable it was. He said it's a fraction compared to the people that are eating the snails. Like it's a small percentage
I
of the
see.
entire.
I see. Okay,
But
well,
the same
good.
snails are like
Yeah.
eaten by other-
I told him, listen, they need to have enough to go along with the
It's not
the
kosher,
business. They need
just
to have
saying.
a non-kosher snail restaurant.
That's
at
it.
the visitor center.
Exactly. Okay, what other things struck me is that he was so proud to be a Machon Meir alumnus from 35 years ago, or 40, 50 years ago? I don't know exactly how long it was.
Interesting. Seeing
I
that
love
photo
those
of Rob Listman from 40 years ago.
I
was
didn't notice which
interesting.
one. I didn't see
was
that
full
one, I
of
think.
Yeah,
40 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all get on. We all get on in time. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, that was a nice presentation, and it's fascinating. It's very exciting to be able to revive a mitzvah which was lost to us for 1,300 years or so. Apparently, in the times of the Talmud, they still were using techelet, although it was illegal. It was made illegal by the Romans. I don't know if you caught that, and that's probably why the tradition got lost. But it's very, very cool. The science, together with the history and the archaeology and the halacha and the sources, it's very interesting stuff. Yeah, I'm going to try to get his presentation, but I actually have the book that I think Nisim won the book. I have it, and I brought it in yesterday. I didn't bring it in today. Okay, so if there's no other questions, I'll show you this one page. I might have shown this to you before. It's about the 70 descendants who migrated with Jacob into Egypt, the 12 tribes and their sons. Ultimately, we get to Moshe. Moshe is our hero in the book of Shemot and beyond. And you can see how he came from the tribe of Levi. And this was just hanging around. I might have shown this to you before, but it's not really a primary subject today. But it's good to have it in your head. Okay, let's proceed. We're going back to our topic, which is the 13 principles of fundamentals of faith. We're almost finished. We're on fundamental number 10, if I'm not mistaken, where we were. It's the close of the middle section, which talks about revelation, Torah min hashamayim, Torah from heaven. Does everybody have one?
Yeah,
Should be enough. And fundamental number 10 in the Rambam's list is that the Torah is eternal, that is unchanging. We mentioned it yesterday in passing, but I figured the Rambam has an entire chapter on it in the fundamentals of the Torah.
Number 9, right?
It's chapter 9 and it's fundamental number 10, I believe. No, maybe it is 9. Maybe it is 9. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's easy to remember. Chapter 9 for number 9. So let's get started, and we'll let the Rambam, state his piece about the Torah being eternal. It's important for us because we were mentioning it yesterday. Someone asked me, does the Torah change? I said it's a funny word to use, right? Of course the answer is no, but of course the answer is yes. So, and it all depends on what you mean by change and how you mean that it changes. Let's read the Rambam and then maybe we'll get a little smarter, okay? David, start us off.
Sure. Okay. It is clear and explicit in the Torah that it is God's commandment remaining forever without change, addition, or diminishment. As Deuteronomy 13:1 states, all these matters which I command to you shall be careful to perform. You shall be careful to perform. You may not add to it or diminish from it. And Deuteronomy 29:28 states, what is revealed is for us and our children forever, to carry out all the words of this Torah. This teaches that we are commanded to fulfill all the Torah's directives forever. It is also said, it is an everlasting statute for all your generations. And Deuteronomy 30:12 states, "It is not in the heavens." This teaches that a prophet can no longer add a new precept to the Torah.
Okay, so there's a few things that he started off with. You can't add or diminish from it. We mentioned it yesterday. You can't make a tzitzit of 5 corners, and tefillin, which has maybe 3 parts instead of the 2, and that's adding. Yeah, on your other arm. What do you think? Whatever, on your other heart, and on your other head. What is revealed? So that's number 1. But the way the mitzvahs were commanded, they stay the same. But then primarily where he's going is that it's forever. It's forever and everlasting statute for all generations. Now he moves on to talk about, well, what do the prophets do? What's, that's really, you see, we're going to skip for a second to the beginning of 2. It says, if so, what is meant by the Torah statement? I will appoint a prophet from among the brethren like you, and I will place my words in his mouth, and he will speak. What's the prophet going to do if he's not allowed to add anything, he's not allowed to take away anything, he's not allowed to change anything? What does he do? So he's going to answer that in section 2. But before that, the basic principle is a prophet is not allowed to change the Torah. The Torah is given by God, and there was no greater prophet than Moshe. Excuse me. So let's. I stopped you in the middle, David. Why don't you finish it off? Therefore,
if a person will arise, whether Jew or Gentile, and perform a sign or wonder, and say that God sent him to A. add a mitzvah, B. withdraw a mitzvah, C. explain a mitzvah in a manner which differs from the tradition received from Moshe, or D. if he says that the mitzvot commanded to the Jews are not forever, but rather were given for a limited time. He is a false prophet. He comes to deny the prophecy of Moshe and should be executed by strangulation, because he dared to make statements in God's name, which God never made. God, blessed be his name, commanded Moshe that this commandment is for us and our children forever, and God is not man that he speak falsely.
Any candidates come up in your mind when you're reading
Yeshua.
this one? Right, the people saying that the mitzvot don't have to be kept anymore. We're familiar with that.
Who's the guy that married the Torah?
Don't know.
Is it Shabbat?
I think it's Shabbat.
Is that right? Okay. Adding a mitzvah, taking away a mitzvah. Moshe? Now number C, who can explain to me number C?
So
You weren't here yesterday, but maybe you were listening on Zoom or on YouTube.
Yeah,
Explaining the mitzvot in a manner which differs from the tradition.
So to me, from what I heard from you guys, and from what that I understand, that to me is if some guy said, okay, listen, the whole thing about a sign between your head, on your arm, and between your eyes, what it actually means is you need to get the Shema tattooed on your arm and your forehead.
Right. Good. What else?
Karite.
Okay, Karaites. Why Karaites?
They break from the tradition.
What tradition? What tradition is he referring to? The oral Torah. What oral Torah? How was that passed on? How was that taught? How did Moshe teach the oral Torah? Orally. Do you remember we read the beautiful description?
The seminar method of
Right, the convention where
one time, then it's a trickle down.
who was taught? Moshe taught directly
Moshe
to
taught Aaron, and then Moshe taught Eleazar and Itamar, and then Moshe taught the 70 elders, and then Aaron taught.
And then he taught. Moshe taught one more time.
The masses.
The masses.
Then he's done, and then Aaron taught
Right.
everyone.
So what was the Rabbi talking about when he was describing that convention? He was saying each mitzvah and its commentary and its tradition. The mitzvah in the manner which it was passed down in tradition. The mitzvah were not just given, without any explanation. Like Moshe gave a good example that, if we only had the the verse about the tefillin, we wouldn't know exactly what it looked like, but we have lots of traditions about exactly what it's supposed to look like. So the prophet cannot change any of that. We have very strong details about the mitzvot, which come down to us from tradition. Okay, so far so good? Natan. Read number 2, please.
Okay. Want me to skip to the second part? Just
Number 2.
So, what is meant by the Torah statement? I will appoint a prophet from among their brethren like you, and I will place my words in his mouth, and he will speak. He's not coming to establish a new faith, but rather to command the people to fulfill the precepts of the Torah and to warn against its transgressions. As evidenced by the final prophet Malachi, who proclaimed Malachi 3:2. Remember the Torah of Moshe, my servant.
That's the end of Malachi, really, the last verse. 1 second. So this is a very important principle, and people say, what was there? Also, we mentioned before Christianity, but also Muhammad. He came, I'm a prophet. I got my own mitzvah to tell you. I got my own jihad mitzvah, or whatever. I'm not an expert on Islam, but they have also all sorts of. He is not coming to establish a new faith, right? The prophet, we're waiting for the prophets to come, but if he comes and he says, oh, by the way, you don't have to keep Shabbat anymore, okay, that's too obvious. Let's say you won't have to keep meat and milk anymore, the separation. You know right away he's a false prophet, because the mitzvot are not going to be changed.
But if you actually look at Islam and you look what he said, it's even worse, because he said what you were doing was God's will. You were up until
at
now
the
you
time
were doing God's will.
Exactly.
But now this is God's new will.
Right.
God's will was correct, and now it's changed, but it's still correct.
Right. What
is even worse.
What's left? What can the prophet do? What's the prophet's job? He says. The Rambam gives a very succinct definition.
To fulfill the precepts of the Torah and to warn against its transgression.
To command them and to warn them and they're the spiritual cheerleaders, if you will. Or more than that, rebukers, is most commonly known as that, watch out, the day is coming. But they're not adding new mitzvot. They're not changing the Torah. They're being the revivalists, if you will. They're being the motivational speaker, we call it in the West.
Yes.
So the prophets, now, they weren't coming from their own motivational speaker. Okay, we made up, he happens to be a good speaker, and he makes up a nice story, and he has a PowerPoint. He was told by God certain messages that he's giving over, right? That's the concept of prophecy, right? That God speaks to him. So what is God telling him? He's telling him maybe some, when you have your phone, and then you've got an app on your phone. Okay. Every once in a while you get an update. Right? Google updates almost every day or whatever it is. I don't know. But they're always updating the program. The program was given, but there's always little tweaks. So is the prophet getting an update to change the program? Well, the prophet's getting messages, but here there's very strict rules according to the Rambam. Anyways, according to the Rambam, he's saying this is. God's never going to change his mind about the mitzvah of the Torah, but maybe he's giving him, specific messages which will spur the people on, right? The famous prophecy of Zechariah. He saw an almond tree. God is coming quickly. The almond tree is the first one to blossom. Mm-hmm. We're in Tu B'Shvat. It's a little early this year. I don't think we're going to see any almond trees blossoming around in 2 weeks, but probably in a month from now. The first almond tree. So God was giving a message. That punishment that I said is going to happen to you if you don't keep the mitzvah, it's coming quickly, right? Or he tells him all sorts of techniques the prophet was given. I think we had it a few weeks ago in the Parsha. Another one of Zechariah. He said, take 2 sticks. One of them says Judah. The other one says Israel, right? And bring them together. Maybe he actually meant 2 trees, and you're supposed to graft them together. and that was a sign of unity. I want you to be together. We knew that God wanted us to be together, but the message now is God is saying, first of all, do this special demonstration, and he's strengthening the message. He's fine tuning it for this generation. What else do prophets? What did they do in the courts of the kings many times? Yes, Russell.
So if the king is ever veering away from the Torah, they'll rebuke them and they'll let them know that they're doing so and that they should do
Good.
this, or they should
What else about the Torah for sure? Yeah, that definitely, like all the rest of the Jewish people, but particularly the leadership. Do you remember we spoke about Josiah, the last hope for the Judean monarchy? And how did he fail? Jeremiah was upset because he didn't listen to him. That was the last hope. Remember, we talked about that a couple weeks ago. What did the prophet tell him to do? What were the instructions that the prophet could give him? He couldn't tell him to change the mitzvot. Yoshia was very good king, right? He telling everybody to do tshuva, trying to get rid of all the avodah zarah. He gave him instructions. We would call them political instructions.
Just to go to war.
Go to war, not go to war, actually.
Yeah.
And those kind of things. So the prophet could give directives about, political maneuvering and all sorts of things, but not to change the commandments, not to add a commandment, not to take away a commandment, and not to say the Torah has changed. And the best proof, he says, is Malachi. Malachi, when did he live?
during the era of the men of the Great Assembly, right?
That's right. He's the last of the prophets, beginning of Second Temple period. So throughout, the last of the prophets. This is also a little bit of a polemic. Do you know what that means? It's like a public argument. It's like it's an argument against somebody else. Polemic. It's a polemic against many writers, Christians, but also Jews, who come to say, well, we're reading this book of the Bible, and we see a major difference between the 5 books of Moses and the prophets. The prophets, they're full of, do justice and to take care of the poor and don't oppress anybody. And the Torah is full of sacrifices and the holidays. And so some people, they make a division. They say there's something called the ethics of the prophets versus the laws of the Torah. And there's no better proof that this is, it's just a question of emphasis, because what does the last prophet, the very last prophet, say in his very last line of the book? Really, chronologically, that's the last one. He says, remember the Torah of Moshe. It's not coming against the Torah of Moshe, but the prophets are coming to give some for sure, moral direction, for sure, to spur them on. But does the Torah not believe in love thy neighbor as thyself? Do we not have mitzvot that you have to be nice to the poor and take care of and not oppress and the correct systems of justice? That applies, it appears in the Chumash as well. So it's not that the prophets were against the Torah or other than the Torah, but they were emphasizing and giving certain messages about what is the major issue now. Like today, people would say, if there was a prophet today, you know what he would be speaking about? Get off your cell phones, right? People are becoming addicted, and there's pornography, and there's that dangerous thing. And 100 years ago, could the prophet have said such a thing?
No.
You could have.
Maybe if he was a prophet, right?
No,
he would know the future.
No,
That's what most people
No, but
assume
you
the
could have said,
prophets
what
are
was-
doing.
No, just stop reading. Stop reading tabloid newspapers.
Right, that's
and
right.
You could have also said the same thing about pornography, because it's.
That's all. That's
always been around.
the oldest business, right? Prostitution, they say.
But
is
it's
the oldest.
the same thing you could have said. Turn off
True.
the radio.
Right.
Get out of the movie theaters. Put
Could
down
be.
the tabloid papers and learn some Torah.
Maybe you're right. So, but the point is, the prophet comes and he just translates the messages of God for each generation for you. But he's not making up a new mitzvah. It's not, okay. So, remember the Torah of Moses, my servant. Now, that's very nice and very clear. Only problem is it's not true.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Because if you read the book, the prophets are always telling the kings and the people what to do. And sometimes they're telling them what to do. It seems like they're telling them to go against the Torah. Or the most famous one, I think he might even mention it, is Eliyahu. He has a famous confrontation against the Baal, the prophets of the Baal, right?
Okay.
And what does he do? He makes an altar
On Har Carmel.
on Har Carmel, and he brings a sacrifice. Wait a minute. Are you allowed to bring a sacrifice?
No.
On Har Carmel? Only in the temple. What was he doing there? Uh-oh. Our whole thesis gets shot. Everything we said up till now is wrong. We see the prophet. Eliyahu was a good guy. We like Eliyahu. He was a true prophet. Again, the Baal were the bad guys. So how can Eliyahu be telling you to do different? How can he be doing things against the Torah? The Rambam's going to answer that question in the continuing words. Okay, Ariel, take over for your brother in the middle of 2. Also,
Also, a prophet may command us to do something which is neither permitted nor forbidden by Torah law. For example, go to such and such a place. Do not go there. Wage war today, or do not do so. Build a wall, or do not build it. In these instances, it is a mitzvah to listen to him. Anyone who violates his directives is liable for death at the hand of God, as Deuteronomy 18:19 states. And a person who will not heed my words, which he speaks in my name, I will seek retribution from him.
okay, so once we have somebody established as a prophet, you have to listen to him. But what he's going to tell you is nothing which is permitted or forbidden by the Torah law. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah when to go to war, where to go to war, what wall to build, and so forth. So there's directives which are extra legal or extra mitzvot. But then it's not. He's going to clarify, and he's going to deal with the question of what I said. What about when he does say to violate the Torah, like the example of Eliyahu? We'll get to that in a minute. But so far, first thing he says is what he can do. He can tell you to keep the mitzvot, command you and warn you. Second thing he says is command you things which are neither permitted nor forbidden by the Torah, which are neutral. And you must listen to him and all those things. Number 3, go ahead, Ariel.
Similarly, a prophet who violated his own prophetic instructions and one who refrains from prophesying are liable for death at the hand of God, since concerning the 3 of them it is said, I will seek retribution from him.
Wow, so who are the 3 people that can be punished for not listening to the prophet? Just read it.
The prophet himself.
The prophet himself, if he doesn't prophesy, God told him, go tell the people. He says, no, I don't want. I want to stay home in bed. I'm scared. He can't. He's not allowed to be scared. He's got to go do what God told him. So he's going to violate. Who else?
One who rephrased from prophesying.
If the prophet is the same,
Violated his own.
this is still him.
Yeah.
He himself doesn't do it. And the previous paragraph, the person who he was told.
Violates his directive.
The person who was told that he doesn't listen, the prophet doesn't listen, or the prophet doesn't prophesy at all. Those are the 3 violations of. The violations of, it says that you must heed my words. When it says I heed my words, it means the words of my prophet. Okay? Yes, Moshe.
So when hypothetically a prophet comes, will we know beyond will every God-fearing Jew know beyond a reasonable doubt that is a prophet?
It's coming up. He's going to talk about it. How do you know who's a real prophet and who's not? Obviously, we're a little out of practice.
It's very easy to pretend to be a prophet, follow all these rules, and just.
It's actually not so easy. If you remember, we learned about what it takes to become a prophet. First, you've got to be perfect. You've got to be wise and rich and upstanding and moral and ethical and beyond reproach.
Okay, thank you for describing me.
Yes, exactly. And then you've got to train and train and train. And then if you get prophecy, then you're tested. You remember we learned this, right?
The whole school story, yeah?
It's easy.
The
It's
schools,
like these people who fake being like a black belt martial arts. It's easy to tell they're not.
That's it.
If you know what you're looking for, then you're
Right. So I don't think it's so easy, but the truth is the first one, after thousands of years, whoa, he better be good, because he's gonna be tested very well. I hope so, Moshe. One day, work towards it. Moshe, we learned that everybody can, if they work hard enough, they can be like Moshe. If we work hard enough. Read that book, yeah. Talk to me when you're done, right? At the end of the path of the just, so Hanan is showing him, it says that you can, if you go through all the stages, it's like a ladder, you go through all the stages, rungs of the ladder, you can reach divine inspiration. And even beyond that, Ruach HaKodesh, it says, and beyond that, you can revive the dead. Moshe, that's power, reviving the dead. Wow. So all you have to do is read the book. Hanan had a very simple solution. But anyways, we have to just assume that at one point prophecy will come back, and we'll know when we see it, or at least the Rambam gives us guidelines about how to act until it gets clear. There's even a stage where he says there's something called a doubtful prophet, until it becomes a for sure, proven, certified prophet. But we're not there yet. We're not. We're still realizing. We're learning the rules. What happens if there is a prophet? What can he do? What he can't do? What can he say? What he can't say? He started off with the Torah is eternal. He's not going to change the Torah. If any prophet comes and says, I'm changing the Torah, I don't care how many certifications he has, there he loses it right on the spot. Okay? Okay. Ariel.
When a prophet who has already proven himself to be a prophet instructs us to violate one of the mitzvot of the Torah or many mitzvot, whether they be of a severe or light nature, for a limited amount of time, it is a mitzvah to listen.
Oh, wait, what's the key point?
Limited
Limited amount of time. Ah, that's called, in Hebrew, Hora'at Sha'ah. It's an instruction of the hour, meaning a temporary instruction. That they're allowed to do, and now he's going to get into Har Carmel. Will you read for us a little bit, Thomas? Top of page 2.
The stage of the early generation, as a part of the oral tradition, if a prophet tells you to violate the precepts of the Torah, as Eliah did on Mount Carmel, listen to him with regard to all things except the worship of false gods. This applies when his command is temporary in nature.
So there's one exception. Even if it's temporary, you can't.
Do idol worship.
Yeah, you can't. The prophet can't demand that you do idol worship. That we know that's a mistake, even temporarily. All the other things, though, if it says don't keep Shabbos this week. If he's got, if he's a prophet, those are within his purvey to temporarily make all sorts of stays. But to say that Shabbat is no longer valid, we don't keep Shabbat anymore, then he's a false prophet. Yeah.
So like anything that is, I don't want to say violatable, but we'll use the word anyway. Under the laws of Pikuach Nefesh is something that we can violate upon, like temporarily, under the orders of a prophet.
It's interesting. Usually, good morning.
No, but let's say if there is a thing that you can violate under the ruling of Pikuach Nefesh, you can also violate that temporarily upon the ruling of a prophet.
So I hear what you're trying to. I see what you're trying to do here, Moshe. What you're trying to do is find a category. What the Rabbi just gave us is one exception, right? One exception was worshiping false gods.
Yeah.
Right? You're not allowed to do idol worship. But Moshe says, wait a minute. I know there's a category of 3. Usually we call them cardinal sins, right? That's what you're thinking, right? Well, there's 3 cardinal sins, which even if someone puts a gun to your head, says you're not allowed to do them. What are they? Idol worship is one, but what's the other 2? That is idolatry.
My
Adultery, is that what you meant to say? Sexual prohibitions. And the third one is?
Murder.
Murder.
If someone
That's
holds a
right.
gun to your gun and it says kill this person.
That's right. You're not allowed to. Exactly. So Moshe is saying, well, maybe what the Rambam, that's what a Rambam means. He says those are the exceptional ones to the false prophet. I don't think you're right. I think this is not the same thing as the three cardinal sins. When the Rambam says everything except for idol worship, he means only idol worship. Why? Because he just said before, the prophet can come and tell you that you have to go to war. That's killing people. So he's allowed to kill people. And what about adultery?
He can tell you, the prophet can come to you and tell you to rape someone? No.
I don't know. Maybe. If it's temporary.
I don't know if you can temporary.
I'm just reading what he says. I'm trying to figure out the rules. If he can tell you to eat pork, why can't he tell you to commit adultery?
Because when you're eating pork,
it's one of the three ones.
When you're committing adultery,
right. Well, if he's allowed to tell you to murder someone, he's allowed to tell you to go to war. So I'm not sure you're right that this is because he said idol worship right away. Oh, we've got a category of three sins which override pikuach nefesh. I'm not sure it's connected. Could be that what's special about idol worship, even more special than adultery and murder.
It's idol worship. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you mean? And therefore what?
It's you between God I guess.
Well, murder and adultery is man and man, or one of the man and woman, I guess. But
right.
is a sin from man to man.
Okay.
But idol worship is a sin of man to God. So no other.
There's lots of sins between man and God. To not violate Shabbat is also a sin from man and God. What do you want to say, Russell?
Oh, I know I was thinking along like a similar track. It's completely antithetical to the covenant. Like it's like the first thing. It's like. That's
right. You worship God or you worship another God. Right, exactly. That's so basic. It's like what Nathan was saying. I was asked this question when my parents wanted me to get into grade 8. They wanted me to skip a grade.
What do you mean?
I skipped grade 7.
Why?
Because my father wanted me to get ahead. He was that type of guy. And he knew I was pretty smart. And so he demanded that I be skipped a grade ahead.
Okay.
So I got tested. So the principal, I come in for a private interview with the principal. This is a Jewish school. So he asked me this question. What's so bad about idol worship? Mm-hmm. Worse than any of the other mitzvahs? I drew a blank. I didn't get the. I wasn't as smart as you guys. You guys all figured out. Well, it's antithetical. It's exactly the opposite of 100%. But anyways, they let me in anyways. I guess on a trial basis. I wasn't so happy about it. Socially, it was difficult for me to join a different group. But in the end, a year later, I was valedictorian. So I guess my father was right. I was pretty smart, but I don't know if he was so smart about social issues. And anyways, yes, I think so. It could be, Moshe, that it's just this one. It's just this one that even if it's temporary, you're not allowed to. But if it's temporarily, any of the other mitzvot, maybe it's allowed. Prophet says. Let's see. Let's keep going. Russell, please read. For example,
on Mount Carmel, Elijah offered a sacrifice outside the temple's premises.
One second, please. Hirsch, do you have one of these? Do you want one of these? No, it's just for today. It's a new one. Okay, go ahead. For example, on Mount Carmel, yeah.
Right. For example, on Mount Carmel, Elijah offered a sacrifice outside the temple's premises, even though Jerusalem was chosen for such service, and one who offers a sacrifice outside the temple's premises is liable for karet. Since he was already established as a prophet.
What's karet?
The cutting up of the soul.
Yeah, it's a punishment of the Torah that your soul gets cut off from the Jewish people. Okay, go ahead.
There's 2 types of karet, right?
I think there's 3 at least, but I don't know. There's just one karet, and we're not quite sure what it means. But okay, go ahead.
Since he was already established as a prophet, it was a mitzvah to listen to him. The commandment "listen to him" applies in these circumstances as well. If they would have asked Elijah, "How can we violate the Torah's commands?" Deuteronomy 12:13. Be careful lest you offer your burnt offerings everywhere. He would have told them, we should not say anything, but anyone who offers a sacrifice outside the temple premises is liable for karet, as Moshe said. The present instance, however, is an exception. I am offering a sacrifice today outside the temple at God's command in order to disprove the prophets of Baal. Similarly, if any other prophet commands us to transgress for a limited time, it is a mitzvah to listen to him. If, however, he says that the mitzvah has been nullified forever, he is liable for execution by strangulation, for the Torah has told us, it is for us and our children forever.
Ouch. How is he supposed to be put to death?
Strangulation.
Was somebody else said that these commandments are no longer liable? Right. It's interesting. Yeah. I don't know. Apparently, it's not one of the 4 ways we put Jews to death. It was censored out of the Talmud, actually, but
it says
we do have a tradition that he was killed, and then I think it was actually a Roman crucifixion was a Roman method of killing people, I think. Anyways, but a false prophet who says don't keep the mitzvah anymore, it's punishable by death. We don't have capital punishment anymore. Not that anybody would be claimed to be a prophet today. Have you ever met a prophet?
Not to my
I mean,
knowledge.
you go downtown New York, you'll meet people claiming to be prophets.
Jerusalem too. Jerusalem too. There's actually something. I think it's in the DSM. The DSM is the diagnostic.
Jerusalem syndrome.
It's a book of all the different mental health issues, diagnoses, and different categories of illnesses. And in there's something called the Jerusalem syndrome. It's actually called the Jerusalem syndrome, not the New York syndrome.
It's when one thinks that they're a prophet.
Yes. Exactly.
I know Rav Singer has posted some videos.
The air is so...
confronting some of these people.
Yeah. The air is so spiritual here in Jerusalem. Maybe that attracts people. But who knows? One day, maybe one of them will be true. We'll see. All right. Number 4. Hirsch, can you read for us? Are you busy? Number 4.
Similarly, if a Navi nullifies a concept which was transmitted by the oral tradition, or states with regard to one of the Torah's laws that Hashem commanded him to render such and such a judgment, or that such and such is the law regarding a particular instance, and the decision follows a certain opinion, he is a false prophet and should be executed by strangulation. This applies even if he performs a wonder, for he is coming to deny the Torah, which states it is not the heavens, however.
It is not in the heavens. So this is a fascinating principle. Not everybody agrees with this one. This one, number 4, is very extreme. He says that the prophet, he's not giving you any additional mitzvah. He's not telling you to do something against the Torah. Let's say there's a machloket. You've heard of that? There might be machloket in Judaism.
That's machlokas.
That's a machlokas. And along comes the prophet and said, God came to me and he told me that Rabbi Yehuda is right and Rabbi Meir is wrong. Should we listen to him? Rambam says he is a false prophet. Should be executed by strangulation. Because the prophet's job is not to decide matters of halacha at all, whatsoever. Even if he's not adding a new mitzvah, he's just saying this opinion's right. I can see in my prophetic vision. Rambam says there is a tremendous divide, absolute separation between 2 realms. The realm of halacha, which should be decided by the rabbis who use their intellect and whatever methods they have for deciding halacha. The main one we mentioned is follow the majority. Right? We talked about that a little bit, right? So if there's a debate, if there's a machloket, you follow the majority. That's the way we decide. not by prophecy. If a prophet comes and says, I can see that he's right. You might have heard of this famous story about an oven. You know what I'm talking about? Anybody? You might have heard of this? No? It's an oven called an achanai oven. It was some kind of an oven which had the different pieces to it. It was basically you could break it down and then build it up again, and as transportable oven type of thing. And there was a debate between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. We should see it inside, but I want to finish this, and
Is this in the Mishnah?
it's a story brought in the Gemara, but it's about Tanaim. It's about Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, who are Tanaim, and this is one of the most famous midrashim of all time. And once I get to it, you'll saying to yourself, "Oh, I've heard about this one before." Rabbi Eliezer said this type of oven is tahor, pure, ritually pure. And Rabbi Yoshua said, no, it's not. It's tameh. And Rabbi Eliezer says, I could prove it to you. I know I'm right. And Rabbi Yoshua says, no, you're not. I think you're wrong. I think it's tameh. And Rabbi Eliezer says, you know what? If I'm right, let the walls of the study hall that we're in lean over. And lo and behold, the walls of the study hall start to lean over. Rabbi Yeshua says, nope, doesn't convince me. Rabbi Eliezer says, you see that stream that's running this way? If I'm right, let the heavens respond and stop the stream and let it go in the opposite direction. And lo and behold, that's what happened. Everybody was amazed. Wow, these are miracles. Unbelievable. Rabbi Yeshua says, sorry, buddy, doesn't convince me. There was a third miracle that he performed. Can't recall what it is right now.
Was it a bot coal?
That's right. That's what I'm looking for. You have heard this before. Yes, of course. Now you know what I'm talking about. And he said, if I'm right, let a voice ring out from the heavens to prove that I'm right. And lo and behold, a booming, I don't know what the voice sounded like, but a voice came out from the heavens and said, Rabbi Eliezer is correct. The halacha should be following Rabbi Eliezer. You know what Rabbi Yeshua said? Lo bashamayim he. That's what we just read. It is not in heavens. The Torah was given to us here, the scholars down here in this world. Don't give me any supernatural proofs. Lo bashamayim he. And we're not going to follow, the majority of the opinion were with Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Eliezer was the lone opinion. We follow the rules. The rules are we have a majority. I don't care how many voices from heaven or miracles you're going to produce. We don't follow the supernatural. This is the Rambam's major proof text for his principle. It said prophecy is of no use whatsoever when it comes to the realm of halakha. When it comes to the realms of mitzvot. Prophecy is for something else. Prophecy can tell you to go to war. It can temporarily tell you to do something. But to say for all ages, this type of an oven is tameh, it can't say that. I don't care how many, even if you have a voice from heaven. And the Talmud concludes this midrash by saying, I think they had somebody who was who visited the heavens. I have to look up the midrash inside, and he says, what was happening up on high when they heard this debate? And the midrash concludes, God said, I give up. Nitzchuni banai, my children overcame me. The assumption being that he was happy about it, that he was giving his sanction, that they did the right thing. Amazing concept. We need to discuss it at much greater length. But this is the Rambam's principle. He says, once the Torah was given to the rabbis, the prophetic age ended. Or according to him, it's not really a question of age, but it's just a question of two different realms. We would say that it's not absolute prophecy. Maybe there's still, the prophet could give you some direction. Maybe we can listen a little bit. We can get some messages from the divine. There's something called Ruach HaKodesh. All you have to do is read the Path of the Just, and you'll get to read Ruach HaKodesh. Or Moshe. We can all be like Moshe, right? So the Rambam says, even if you're a prophet, the prophecy cannot affect halacha and the mitzvot which were given from God. It's up to the rabbis then to determine, to the best of their ability, through their intellect, through their tradition, through their innovate, what TT and II, right? Transmitted tradition and inspired innovation. It's inspired innovation, but there's rules, there's a mechanism. You can't just come and say, oh, I'm inspired. I got a message from God. I know that Rabbi Meir, that Rabbi Yeshua is right. You can't say that. I know that Rabbi Eliezer is right. This is the Rambam's principle. And as I said, this is a very extreme position. Not only is it limiting prophecy in terms of not to violate the Torah, not to claim something against the Torah for all time, but also even if you're saying that I think that this position is correct, this position is incorrect, even if he performs a wonder, he says that's not allowed. If, however, continue number 4, Hirsch, finish off number 4. I'm sorry to interrupt you in the middle, but it's just such a beautiful story,
If, however, he states that for a limited time we should follow a particular course of behavior, it should be listened to with regard to all things.
Right. If it's for a limited time, we have to listen to him. That's the mitzvah, to listen to the prophets. Moshe, take it out. Take it away. Number 5.
Number 5. When does the above apply? With regard to all other mitzvot, regarding the worship of false gods, however, he should not be heeded, even for a limited time.
And historian in general.
But is it accurate?
I can think of like 10 of them.
Gilbert Martin?
Yes, Martin Gilbert. Exactly. Thank you. Martin Gilbert. Thank you. So he put together this sort of book of maps, which I am sharing with you, even though, of course, you should buy the book, and this is just for teaching purposes. So you can see here on the first page, From Slavery to the Promised Land, we don't know exactly that any of this is true. Someone asked, how precise is this?
Yeah.
We don't know. We don't know where Mount Sinai was, and this attempt, Mount Sinai is down at the bottom of the Sinai Desert, in the wilderness of Sinai. You can see that all the way at the bottom,
Yes.
but we don't know exactly where it is. There's other traditions too. But we went from Egypt, this is accurate, it says, from Sukkot to Etam, you see, and then to other places, Elim, Fidim, Etzion Gaver. They had some trouble in Kadesh Barnea. They had to go back. Why did they go around that way? Maybe because the spies, they couldn't go straight up into the land of Canaan. They had to go through the land of Moab, as you can see over on the right-hand side of your map. The cities built for Paro in last week's Parsha are Pitom and Ramses. There, pretty much we can see those are the major cities. Turn the page. We have another map. Oh, I guess I must have shared this with you, and I just didn't put it in my entering the Promised Land. It takes up where the end of the arrows were on the previous map. And we have the Moabites, the Ammonites, which were not allowed to conquer. But in the northern part of the Transjordan, that's where the Sichon and Og were, where we actually did conquer. And and then Moshe dies, and Joshua goes over the Jordan River into the land of the Jebusites, the Canaanites, and the Philistines, and he had the war of the southern kings, the war against the northern kings. You read the book of Joshua; it's a good one. Then he divided it up, and the 12 tribes, approximately. Who did we mention yesterday? Yisachar and Zvulun. Anybody can find them, right? Remember we talked about Can you see them on the map?
Yes.
Right, Zvulun is closer to the coast. He was the merchant. Issachar in the mountains of the Galilee, the scholars, which later on in history became a center once again for scholarship. Okay, where's Jerusalem?
The south between Judah and Benjamin.
There you go. Perfect. You see that? Okay. Turn the page. Again, this is for your perusal afterwards when you're studying the Tanakh. Kingdom of David and Solomon, the biggest first commonwealth. Questions? Comments? Can I help Hanan something? No? So in the time of King Solomon and David, we conquered all these areas, which including the Moabites and the Ammonites. All of the area of Aram, all the way up to the rivers of the Euphrates River. And then, at the end of a couple hundred years, Assyria came and exiled the 10 of the tribes. Only Judah was left. Until Assyria was replaced with the Babylonians. And the Babylonian ultimately destroyed Jerusalem and the kingdom of Judah as well. Turn the next page. This is interesting about where did we go? So obviously the first 10 tribes went to the east. So you can see all the way over to Persia, some say as far as China. The Kaifeng community has been reconnected recently. I taught 7 of them.
Wow.
Yeah.
May I ask what their tradition is?
So unfortunately, in the last few hundred years, the shul was destroyed, the rabbi died, and they knew very, very little.
They didn't know how to read Hebrew.
Nothing. I mean, they have some artifacts, and they have some they kept somewhat some traditions. They wouldn't eat pork, which in China is a big thing. They eat everything over there. And there's a shul there, and there's Sifrei Torah from the Kaifeng community. Now they're in the museums, but and there was a stele. It's still there. It's like a big historical document that's engraved, which tells the history of how they made it to China and how the first Jews were accepted by, I forget which emperor it was in certain dynasty. And it's very cool. Anyways, one of my students who converted is about to have a baby. The firstborn officially Jewish Chinese baby. He's not Chinese anymore. I wonder what he's going to look like. His wife is Australian. No. Of course, some of the Jews went to Egypt as well. The next map has 4 maps on it. The first one is the description of the Babylonian Empire. Then the Persian Empire got even larger. Then Alexander the Great. We spoke about him around Hanukkah, and ultimately the Ptolemaic Empire, which was the Egyptian Greeks, before the story of Hanukkah took place. And for some reason, there's a map here of the Jews of Iraq. I'm not quite sure why. I'll tell you why. It's because it's there that the Talmud was formed. As the Jewish community from the time of the exile of the first temple, they remained a very strong community throughout the second temple period and then afterwards as well. And so after we have the Mishnah from the land of Israel, the Babylonian Talmud gains tremendous prominence, as we all know. And these are some of the names of the cities that you find throughout the Talmud. Rav was the leader of the Surah, the Beit Midrash in Surah, and Shmuel was the leader of the Beit Midrash in Pumbedita. If you can see those on the last page, Surah and Pumbedita, they're just on the Euphrates River, and these are famous. For anybody who studies the Talmud, he knows these names of these cities. But that's, I guess, a little bit of makeup material for those who were not here when I gave these maps to you originally. And why should they be taking up my space over here? Now let you keep them in your folders. I still have to get you a folder, I know. But questions, comments? We'll stop here for today. Tomorrow we'll learn the book of Kings in the book of Judges in the Rambam, Laws of Kings, chapter 11 and 12 if we get to it. Beautiful stuff. Okay? Thank you.